Hello and welcome back to NV Fine Art Studio. I'm so excited. I received a bunch of products from MEEDEN and I'm going to give you my first impression. As you know, I'm on a hunt for good quality, affordable products for watercolor painting. So many of you comment that the brushes and the paints I use are too expensive, especially if you don't want to do full-size painting but just practice doing things like brush strokes or graded washes, painting wet on wet, or single elements like people, cars, trees and things like that. And the reason I have accepted reviewing MEEDEN products today is that they use 100% cotton 300 GSM BaoHong watercolor paper. How good is that? This is my favorite paper so far. And I thought if they use professional paper for their blocks, they know what they're doing and there is a chance the other products might be decent. Before we start, let me quickly give you the prices and also the 10% discount code. And in my opinion, this is the part that cannot be ignored. Everything you see on my desk, the MEEDEN block paper, 10 brushes set, ceramic bowl, 24 paint tubes, cost only $54.95, which is crazy because it's less than 2 paints from Daniel Smith, for example. Plus, I have 10% discount code for you if you use the link in the description below with code NINA10, so it will be under $50. I was also given this BaoHong Academy block. Academy means professional quality, with original BaoHong cover to compare to MEEDEN. I was told that MEEDEN is literally the same paper, just with MEEDEN cover, and I believe that, but why not to test, right? I also have the 10% discount code for this product as well for you if you use the link in the description below with code NINA10. If you're interested, please check it out. Without further ado, let's start, and I'm very excited. Let's start with the watercolor paper pads. Let's do MEEDEN first and then compare it to BaoHong watercolor paper. I like that it has green edges all over and it's easier to spot where to start opening. I've got this leaf cutter. I've never used it before, but it seems like it's going to be a good tool. I usually used spatulas, but let's see how it works. Yep, it's quite actually easy to use. So this is just a cover paper. This is not an actual watercolor paper. Now let's open the BaoHong pad. It seemed to be pretty similar, but it doesn't have the green edges, and in my opinion it's probably better to have these green edges because it's always difficult to find where you start opening, but obviously as soon as you open once you know where to find the opening. Another nice little touch by MEEDEN is to include the instruction on how to open the pad on the cover. If you've never used pads before, this might be very helpful. At the first glance, these two pads look identical. I don't really want to paint on both of them today, so I think I'm gonna just do MEEDEN paper, first impression on MEEDEN paper, and then in the next couple of weeks I do full-on in-depth comparison of MEEDEN and BaoHong papers. Now let's have a look at the ceramic container for the water. I'm actually very excited about that. Oh, it looks beautiful, really good quality. It's actually quite heavy in a good way, like a good dish, and it will be steady with the water when you rinse your brushes. Another good point, it has 2 wells, because sometimes when you paint you actually need clean water, especially for when you're softening the edges, for example, you need clean water to rinse your brush. But I believe it's probably made for the technique when you paint and you rinse the brush in one container with dirty water and then grab clean water from another container. Now let's have a look at MEEDEN paints. This is a 24 color set with 12mm tubes. I definitely like the colors they included in this set, but let's go through every color and see the pigment number, because this is what you rely on, not just the color name, and the opacity. First in line is titanium white, pigment PW6, transparency fully opaque, and light fastness is 3+, which is pretty good. The PW6 is one of the most popular whites and is opaque in quality, and I believe Holbein Titanium White has exactly the same pigment. Next in line is Lemon Yellow, pigment PY3, transparency, semi-transparent, light fastness, 3 pluses. Another very common pigment for using in lemon yellow and Hansa yellow paints. I know Daniel Smith uses it for Hansa yellow, Da Vinci for Hansa yellow as well, and Jackson's and White Knights use it for lemon yellow. And I have here tube of White Knights and also Daniel Smith. And we will definitely do in-depth comparison to other paints in my later tutorials. Next one is Pale Yellow, PY1, transparency semi-transparent and light fastness, triple plus. It's not a very common pigment. The only paint I found with P1 is yellow from White Knights. Next one is Gamboge, pigment PY1 and PO13. It means it's a mix of yellow and orange. I have a Daniel Smith new Gamboge color, which is completely different pigments, PY97 and PY110. And the Daniel Smith new Gamboge is very similar to yellow ochre, which I use a lot. But in regards to PY1 and PO13, the only other brand that I found that uses similar combination, but with PY3 is White Knights Golden. Next one is Yellow Ochre, PY42. It's opaque and triple plus. I have Yellow Ochre from Holbein, but it uses completely different pigments, and I don't really have any paint that uses PY42, which is a quite typical pigment for quinacridone gold. So we may compare it either to Yellow Ochre by Holbein or quinacridone gold by Daniel Smith, or maybe both of them. Next tube is Yellow Orange, pigment PO13, and this pigment is quite unique, and I couldn't find any other brand that would use this pigment on its own. The next one is quite unique too, Scarlet Red, PR21. It looks like it's a primary red pigment that used for other red colors in MEEDEN range. For example, next in line is Vermilion, and it's a mix of PR21 and PO13. So basically it's a mix of red and orange. The next paint is Crimson Red, and again it's a mix of PR21 and PR13. So basically it's a mix of bronze red and maroon red. I haven't found any other brands who would use these pigments, so I'll probably compare it to my typical alizarin crimson from Daniel Smith. I'm also planning to compare next paint to alizarin crimson. This is Rose PV19, and PV19 pigment is known as quinacridone rose, and it's also used in Rose Madder. The next paint is Cerulean Blue, and it's made of PV6 and PB15. PB15 is a phthalo blue pigment, and it's a very common pigment used by many other brands to make different sorts of blues. Honestly, the only thing I want to compare it to is my favorite Cerulean Blue by Winsor & Newton. It's quite unique in its color, and it's absolutely essential color in my palette for making greens, so I would definitely be interested in something more affordable. Next two paints are based on the same pigment, PB29. Cobalt Blue is a PB29 and white, and Ultramarine Blue is pure PB29. And PB29 is commonly known as an ultramarine pigment. So I'm hoping to compare it to Classy Ultramarine Blue by Daniel Smith, which has exactly the same pigment, PB29. The next paint is Prussian Blue, and it's based on PB15 and PV23. PV23 is a carbazole violet pigment. It's a red-purple color. And PB15 is a phthalo blue that was used in Cerulean Blue that we discussed before. The next four colors are greens, and they're all based on PG7 phthalo green with some sort of yellow or blue. It's quite an unusual combination because greens are usually based on blue pigment mixed with yellow pigment. Anyway, I don't really use greens from tubes. I usually mix my own. The only green I have is sap green, and I'm going to compare sap green with sap green from MEEDEN, although they're based on completely different pigments, but I don't think I have any other choice. The next two are violet and brilliant purple, and they both based on PV23. PV23 is a carbazole violet pigment. I have a range of violets here, and I only noticed it in Carbazole Violet by Daniel Smith. So, violet is pure PV pigment, so basically carbazole violet pigment, and brilliant purple is a mix of PW6 and PV23. In other words, it's a mix of white and carbazole violet. Next one is burnt sienna, and it's a classy PR101 pigment. It's a classy pigment for making beautiful earthy colors, and I'm so glad they used this pigment for burnt sienna. For this exact reason, I'm using burnt sienna by Winsor & Newton in my palette, and in my personal opinion, this is the most beautiful color I have ever tried, and I will be so interested in comparing these two. The next two are raw umber and burnt umber, and both based on PBR6. PBR6 is a iron oxide pigment, and it's widely used by other manufacturers such as Daniel Smith, Schmincke, White Knights, and others. I don't think I actually have a color that has PBR6 pigment in it. I remember having Mars Brown by White Knights, and it's definitely based on PBR6, but I just couldn't find it, but I'm sure it's somewhere there. If I can't find it, we'll just compare it to whatever earthy colors we already have here. The last in the range is black, PBK11, and this pigment is widely used by different manufacturers such as Daniel Smith, Rembrandt, Schmincke, and others. And the only tube I actually have is Daniel Smith Lunar Black, and it's definitely a very black color. That was the paint set. Let's put it away, but not too far away because we're still gonna paint today. And let's have a look at the brushes. This is nice color. Let's have a look at this fan brush. Oh, it's so soft. I can't believe how soft this is. This is unbelievable. I didn't realize how good they're gonna be. They're super soft, extremely soft. You know what? I don't even want to say anything at this point. They look extremely good. They're very soft, and actually these round brushes, they look exactly the same as Skoda Pearl set. That's the Skoda Pearl, and the fiber is very similar, and the point is very, very skinny. It's a very fine point. Here they are side by side, and I'm very excited. I can't wait to try them. This is my John Pike palette, and I'm quickly going to squeeze a little bit of each color on that palette, and I will go in the same order as they are in the set. I'm going to start with that round brush just because I have a Skoda Pearl and I know the feel of a Skoda Pearl on the paper. So let's start with this brush. So I'm grabbing a little bit of water on the palette for mixing. So far it feels exactly the same, so let's try this on paper. It actually feels even a little softer than a Skoda Pearl. My only wish, they had a mop brush made from this beautiful fiber, something slightly bigger than this round brush, and I think it would be absolute perfect brush set. The brush feels great. Now let's test some colors. Let's start with these greens. I'm going to paint I'm thinking maybe like a tree or something, but I'll be probably using all sorts of colors, every single color we have on the palette. So it's not like we're not painting actually a tree, we're tasting colors. So far it looks beautiful, it flows beautifully. I have no issues whatsoever, and as you can see, I'm not actually interested in every single color, how they look on their own. I'm interested how they mix together and what kind of mixtures they create. So I'm trying to mix a few colors here and there. So far we tried to create some sort of green. Now I want to change the brush to that fan brush, and let's do a few dry brush marks. So I'm going to use tissue, and I'm going to grab, I think, like yellow, mix of yellow. I'm going to mix it with this green. Now I'm trying to destroy this a little bit, and we'll do a dry brush mark to suggest less populated with leaves, branches, basically outline of the tree. So far it works perfectly. I have no issues with this brush whatsoever. It's beautiful. It's really good, very soft. Okay, now let's try flat brush, and let's add a few more colors to it. And actually I think we need a bit more saturation in our picture. I'm going to spray this because I want to keep working wet on wet, because probably this is the most important area to test how paints work together on paper on wet. Actually, what I want to say is that usually cheaper colors, they tend to stay where you put them. So they hardly ever move and mix together on the paper by themselves. So my only concern here is how they mix together and if they flow into each other and create beautiful mixtures and patterns. So far, I know I just only used a couple of colors, but so far they actually move really nicely on paper. They disperse nicely, not too far, not extremely like a burst of, I don't know, like an explosion or something, but there is a very, very nice soft blend between all these colors. Okay, I think we need to start adding some violets and blues and earthy colors into all these mixes, and see if there is a consistency in blending throughout all the colors in the set. Okay, now I want to spray this and see how they react to spraying. Usually when you spray, the colors tend to move downwards under the force of gravity. And poor quality colors don't do that. So I'm interested if spraying these colors will work as well as with more expensive, well-known brands. Moving on the paper doesn't happen instantaneously. It usually takes a couple of minutes. So while the paints are moving, I think I'm going to paint the tree branches. And at this point, I'm going to test the tip of the brush, how it paints, and also dry brush marks. And so far, I'm extremely happy with this brush. I'm seriously considering to never even ever buy a Skoda Pearl again. I mean, I have no idea for how long these brushes last, but a Skoda Pearl doesn't last actually for that long. The tip of the brush gets dull quite quickly. So for the amount of money you pay for a Skoda, I think you can buy a whole set a couple more times, and it's still probably be cheaper than buying one Skoda Pearl brush. Actually, in regards to the paper, because we haven't really talked about the paper just yet, and yeah, it responds to the paint, to the water, exactly the same as BaoHong. I have no issues with this paper whatsoever. It's brilliant, it's great. Basically, this is BaoHong paper. I'm not sure for how long we've been painting, and obviously I sprayed this area quite a few times, but it's still wet, and I'm still using very watery mixture, and we have no issues. We don't have any cauliflower effects or anything like that. As you can see, I'm still going into wet areas, and it creates nice and soft edges. It's beautiful. This paper is absolutely great, my favorite by far. I've just done a few darker value mixtures of some blues with blacks, and I sort of created an effect of deeper shadows in the foliage. So far everything works well, no issues whatsoever. The only difference I see at this point that I need to use more paint to get the saturation I want. In comparison to like Daniel Smith or Winsor & Newton, I usually just use the tip of the brush to grab paint, but here I actually need to grab paint with the brush, like a little piece of wet paint, and that's when you mix it with water it dilutes quite a bit. So I assume you need more paint to get a similar saturation, similar darkness in comparison to other like well-known, more expensive brand. But I think you only need probably like twice as much paint in comparison to whatever Daniel Smith or Winsor & Newton. But if you compare prices, you can probably get the whole set for the price of one tube. So it's definitely good value for money. To be very honest, I definitely wouldn't paint masterpiece for an art gallery with these paints, but for practicing, for learning, it's absolutely great. They did such a good job with these paints. I was, to be honest, I was skeptical. The only reason I accepted to test these paints because they use BaoHong watercolor paper, and this gave me some hope that they would be some sort of decent paints and decent brushes. But receiving all of this and actually trying this and seeing these great results, I'm honestly speechless. It's really good. Now I'm going to sign this using the smaller brush and to show you the finesse of the point and how much paint it actually holds. So it's amazing, it's beautiful. The brushes are really good. The only wish, as I said before, they would have a larger brushes and like a similar to mop or even just a round brush but in a bigger size. So now I'm drying this, and then we will have a look how these paints look dried, and then we will paint something more specific like a landscape or seascape or something like that, something a bit more intentional. So here's the dried results. So please leave your comments below. What do you think about these paints, these brushes and the paper? In my opinion, it's great, it's beautiful. I'm really happy with the result, but I would definitely like to hear your opinion. So please leave your opinion in the comments down below, and thank you for that in advance. So now let's do a little demonstration. I'm going to start with spraying the paper, basically pre-wetting very lightly the paper. And we're going to paint the sky. I'm going to use this flat brush. Again, it's very soft and it's actually quite pointy for a flat brush. When I paint the sky, I usually start with yellow ochre, so I'm going to do exactly the same. So this is a very light, it's actually a bit too light, as I said. You need more paint to get same saturation, so I added probably twice as much into the mixture. So this is a light value, I'd say probably coffee consistency mixture. So there is 70% of paint and 30% of water in this mixture. Now I'm going to add a little bit more of yellow ochre into the mixture and paint the right side of the sky, only the right side. And this is to increase the tonal value and create a variation of value from light to dark, because sky is never all the same value all around. It's always a bit lighter on one side and a little bit darker on the other side, really depending where the sun is shining from. Then I usually go with lavender, but because we don't have lavender, I'm going to use cobalt blue and a little bit of red. I think this is a scarlet red and it's very similar to cadmium red light, so I'm going to use that. So basically this is my substitution for lavender, and I'm going to paint the clouds with this blue. For some reason I thought it would be much harder to paint the sky with that flat brush, but to be honest, I used flat brushes before. I usually use a 2-inch flat brush to paint larger scale paintings, like a full sheet or like a 1 meter by 70 centimeters paintings, because regular mops, they aren't big enough to paint this size. It's actually pretty similar technique, and I'm very happy with this brush. We finished the right part of the sky, but the left part looks a little too empty, so let's add a bit of a cloud there. I'm mixing same colors, red and blue, And yeah, that's quite good, and we're still working wet on wet, so I'm going to paint clouds over here and a few horizontal marks because we're getting closer to the horizon, and the closer to the horizon we get, the more flatter the clouds are. The lighter part of the clouds are done, but now we need to paint the sky, so I'm adding ultramarine blue to the mixture and I'm going to paint the blue sky at the top. I'm just imagining this, so there is no actual reference or anything like that. And okay, I'm quite happy with that, but now we need to create some sort of a horizon line, so I'm using the same blue, whatever I had basically on my brush. And now we need to do the darker clouds, so now I'm making these horizontal brush marks. This is what I talked about before. The closer to the horizon we get, the flatter the clouds are. And now we need to deepen the tonal value. We need to make it darker for the bottom of the clouds, so we're going to use slightly less water in our mixtures and slightly more paint in our mixtures. Basically we need to achieve a proportion of 50-50 paint and water in the mixture. And the sky is done, and I think we're going to do a seascape because I don't really want to paint the trees or anything actually that would cover the sky, because the sky is quite a it's not just like a very basic just a blue sky with few clouds. I think it's a good dramatic sky, and it's best to if we leave it as is without covering it with trees or buildings or anything like that. So let's paint seascape. Typically for the sea I use cobalt turquoise and yellow ochre, and I'm doing exactly the same here. Ooh, it's quite bright, a bit unexpectedly bright, and I would presume it's due to the pigment they used for cobalt turquoise. This is phthalo blue, I think it was PB 15 or something like that, so it's quite intense. But it's obviously not a big deal, you get used to it. I added a little bit more of yellow ochre in comparison to what I would have added to cerulean blue, and it worked. It's a beautiful marine color. And obviously this is my first try with these colors, and I'm trying to go to colors that I usually use, but it's not necessarily a thing. In the next couple of days I'll try different mixes, and I'll try to mix different blues with different yellows, and I'll see what works best. And I hope my next review of these paints, my next in-depth review of these paints, will also include best mixtures you can get from all these colors. Actually here, as you can see, I'm struggling a little bit to create waves, surf on the waves, that white foam with this flat brush, but only because I've never done this before. I usually use more brush, but obviously I don't want to give up. I've seen so many artists using flat brushes, never touching mobs, so I know it's possible, I've never done this before. Okay, now I'm mixing yellow ochre with a bit of blue, and I'm transitioning the sea into this sand. And this needs to be quite a soft transition because first we have sea, then we have wet sand, and then we have dry sand. And wet sand is usually quite cool. First of all, it's wet, so it's a little darker, and secondly, it usually reflects the sky, and that's why it always looks cooler than the dry sand. The horizon line washed away a little bit, so I'm going to use this flat brush. The flat brush is actually perfect for that, and I'm trying to fix the horizon line so it's nice and soft but still defined. Okay, now we're going to work on the dry sand, so it needs to be definitely warmer, and I'm using burnt sienna and yellow ochre together. It's quite nice. Yep, this is a really good color. I'm quite happy with that. Exactly what I expected from this mixture. And as you can see, we have a really nice and soft transition from that lighter warm value and the darker warm value in the very foreground. There is a little bit more of burnt sienna in this mixture. And now I really want to try that black and burnt umber. This painting doesn't need it, but I really want to try it, so I'm going to mix this together. It looks actually quite nice. Yeah, I quite like that. So I'm mixing whatever darks I have, violets and blacks and burnt sienna, whatever we haven't used yet. It looks quite good. Quite happy with the blending and transitioning. Also, at this point, the sea had time to dry a little bit, so we can actually add the darker value waves, the shadowy waves. So I'm going to use that violet mixture that I have already on paper with this dark mixture that we've just used for the very foreground. And I'm going to add a few brush marks, darker brush marks for the darker waves. Actually, let's use that ultramarine with violets and paint the horizon line once more, because it's still too light. It keeps disappearing with all that moisture on the paper. Okay, now I want to test how the paint responds when I add just water to the painting. Let's add the water first. And also I want to test actually the lifting. Now let's do the lifting. It stains quite a bit. Let's do this once more. It looks like the green paints stain, but the earthy colors don't stain as much. I definitely know the phthalo pigment definitely stains, so maybe that's due to that. But the good thing that not all blue colors actually made with phthalo blue pigment. So if you don't really want any staining, you just use the other colors that don't have phthalo blue pigment in it. Okay, I think I'm gonna do a few darker waves, like a cream consistency mixture, wet on into wet. So there is approximately 70% pigment and only 30% water in this mixture. And I'm going to add a few waves in a darker tonal value. We need to blend this a little bit better, like that. And these horizontal lines will help to suggest the horizontal surface. Okay, now I'm going to dry this and probably add a boat or something like that, just because I want to test how thicker paint works on this paper, wet on dry. Okay, actually at this point the lifting situation bothered me a little bit, and I decided to keep going and see what I can actually achieve with lifting, what I need to do to leave the colors properly, so to almost leave a white of the paper and remove the color completely. And I realized that actually in some areas you need to pre-wet the area a little bit more and put more pressure on the brush when you do the lifting. And also in some areas it's best if you actually pre-wet or spray the area completely and then do the lifting, especially if you need to lift a large area. And just because I did so much damage to the painting, I decided that's best if I do a bit of glazing to make it actually look okay. So that's what I did at the end. So now I'm going to dry this, and then we're gonna paint the boat wet on dry as originally discussed. So I decided that the boat is going to be red, and I'm just trying to assume what kind of shape it would be if it was on that beach, and I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, and I'm using two bright reds, and this is a thick mixture of orange yellow and scarlet red. And as soon as I'm happy with the preliminary shape, I'm starting to add the darker tonal values, and this is for the shadows on the boat. Then I'm going to switch the brush to a round brush, and I'm going to drop a little bit of water for better blending in those darker tonal values. And also this brush is a little bit more, it's much more precise than that flat brush, and it's easy to adjust the shape of that boat. Now I mixed the lighter value shadows using mostly ultramarine blue, and when I say lighter mixture, it means there is more water in the mixture and less paint. This is how you achieve lighter tonal values. And this is a darker shadow behind the boat, and as you can see there is more paint to make it darker and less water. And now I'm going to add a few little details to the shore, and also I'm going to soften the edges of that shadow, and it works well exactly as I expected, so there is no issues whatsoever. I'm very happy with the paint, with the brushes, with the paper, with pretty much everything. I mean, if you're looking for something more affordable to start watercolor painting, this is definitely no-brainer. I would definitely recommend this. And personally, I'm actually so happy with this. I mean, if you've ever tried MEEDEN before, please leave it in the comments. Please leave your opinion in the comments below. I would definitely be happy to hear your opinion. But I'm so happy with this product. I'm actually thinking to do full demo for creative tier on Patreon, because I want to experience using this product on a full-scale painting. So the only thing I will replace is the paper, because this is a 10 by 7 inch pad, and I usually paint on half a sheet, and I think I may use quarter sheet for this demonstration, but I still want to use the brushes that I have in this set. And at the end I want to compare it to my typical painting and see the results. Here's the finished painting and the end of my first impression, which is something that I didn't expect. If you like it, please subscribe, and if you want to see more demonstrations, please find me on Patreon. The link will be in the description below. This is all for today. Until my next video, bye.